What is up, everybody? My name is Jericholic8704, here to give you another installment of Raw is Jericholic8704. So I know we missed last week's Raw, that should be Raw July 12th, 2004. And honestly, that was all just me being lazy. I really just had no intention of watching Raw. I didn't feel like watching Raw, and I started up the ECW series last week, so I thought maybe that could be a nice substitute. But I really, really wanted to get to this Raw July 19th, 2004, emanating from the world's greatest arena. And no, I am not referring to Madison Square Garden. I am referring to the MCI Center, now known as the Verizon Center, in our nation's capital, Washington, D.C. And if you guys know anything about me, is that I live in Maryland, about 30 minutes away from Washington, D.C., and that is correct. You are assuming correct. I, as a young, let's see, it was 2004, I was 7 years old. I, as a young 7-year-old boy, attended this Raw. This very Raw. I remember exactly where I sat. And the weird thing is, when I looked back at this Raw, there were only a few things that I remembered, and I'll tell you as I go along in this review. And this review might run a little bit longer just because I might be going over things that I was doing, when I was there live. This wasn't my first Raw. My first Raw was September 22nd, 2003. It was the day after Unforgiven 2003. That was my first Raw, so this was my second ever WWE show that I went to live. And of course, I was only 7 years old. I was eating everything up. And looking back, this Raw was it was up and down. When I was looking at it, there were a few things that were like, okay, this is boring. A few things were like, okay, this is really good. And then other things where I was like, what the fuck is going on? So let's dive right in. Let's do a little bit of a recap of last week. This is basically the major angle last week was, as you all know, Chris Benoit defeated Triple H at Vengeance when Eugene inadvertently hit Triple H with a chair, screwed up, and cost Triple H the match. So last week, Triple H is pissed because he didn't win the World Heavyweight Championship, and Eugene's all concerned and everything. And Triple H is like, look, I'm not mad at you. So Eugene faces Chris Benoit. Eugene thinks he beats Benoit, but Benoit has his foot on the rope, so Eugene celebrates with the title. Evolution comes out, and they beat up Eugene 4-on-1. That's basically all you need to know. So our opening promo is with Triple H. He comes out, and Triple H is just walking tall. He's on top of the world. JR is disgusted with him. He's just cutting this promo on him about how much he sucks and everything. So Triple H gets on the mic and he says, last week was low. I felt really bad about it. I kept thinking there's no way Triple H, could have done something even as horrible as beating up someone like Eugene. And then all of a sudden Triple H just goes, I farted. And he basically equated his situation with Eugene to a fart. As in, once you let it go, you feel so much better. And he gets right in front of the camera. He says, Eugene, I know you're sitting with your mom. He refers to Eugene's mom as Miss Dinsmore. So I guess, in kayfabe, Eugene's last name is Dinsmore, referring to his actual last name. And I remember Triple H, calls Eugene over and he gets the camera guy just inches forward towards Triple H and he gets right up in Triple H's face. And I remember watching it live, and you could see the cameraman slowly you saw him get into the ring, and then slowly inch his way towards Triple H, so that was kind of cool. And Triple H basically says, all the fans hate you, I hate you, Evolution hates you, and all that. Triple H then showed a video, and he said, Eugene, you're pathetic. And if you don't know what the word pathetic means, this is what I want to show you. And it was like a Raw exclusive, after the show went off the air, Eugene was being carted out, and William Regal and Chris Benoit were crying because, Eugene had been just demolished and all bloody and bruised and battered and beaten by Evolution. And Triple H says, there's no crying in wrestling, and your World Heavyweight Champion is making an embarrassment of himself. And then Bischoff comes out and he says, because Triple H is such a great man, and he officially announces that Eugene is officially done with Raw. He will not be on Raw again. Furthermore, he tells Triple H that next week in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, which of course upsets the DC crowd, there will be a 60-minute Iron Man match with Triple H and Chris Benoit for the World Heavyweight Championship. Triple H says that he's the best, no one can hang with him for an hour, and he will win the title. Then William Regal shows up, and Regal says that he's not frightened of crying, and he's not afraid of Triple H. And William Regal rips off his suit jacket, he has his vest on, he rolls up his sleeves, and he just starts wailing the shit out of Triple H. Now, this is what I always thought about when I watched this. They brawl for a bit. Eric Bischoff, he calls security, and they cart, William Regal out of there, and that's the last we see of Triple H for the rest of the night. Well, kind of. We see him backstage for 1 second, and then other than that, he's done. William Regal. In these Raw reviews, I do a star of the show kind of thing, where it's who is the best person on the show. I want to erase every single star of the show that I've ever done and give them all to William Regal. because William Regal is so amazing. Not just in this story. I mean, he's great in this storyline, but it's really opened my eyes to William Regal. You know, a lot of people say, like, oh, William Regal, he's one of the best wrestlers to never be WWE champion. And you know what? I agree. But when I was younger and, like, you know, a couple years back, I was like, William Regal, yeah, he was fine. He was okay. He was a good wrestler, but there really wasn't anything else there. I was so wrong. I was incredibly wrong. William Regal is amazing. This guy, tears in his eyes. He was, and I mentioned this before, he was so good at emotionally investing himself into his storylines. And the character progression of William Regal, I mentioned this earlier, you saw him change. You saw him grow to love Eugene. It was amazing. William Regal was an amazing storyteller, and he looked so courageous and so awesome going in after Triple H and just beating the hell out of him. It was so great. And you often wonder, like, why didn't they ever do anything with this guy? Now, I know William Regal had his addiction problems. And you could always argue, like, well, that was one of the reasons why back then he didn't, have that much success. But now, I'm pretty sure he was clean by now, wasn't he? I thought, like, a majority of his problems were around, like, the late 90s, early 2000s. I thought by 04 he was pretty much clean. But, like, why didn't they do anything with this guy? Like, he got the Intercontinental Championship in, like, 2008, 2009 after feuding with, like, Jamie Noble, right? Or, like, it was something like that. I can't remember. But the point is, William Regal had so much potential. And again, I know he had past demons, but even now, at this point, they were doing nothing with him. After Eugene got hurt, they hardly used him for anything. And he was one of the best guys on the roster, not just as a wrestler. I know everyone instantly thinks of William Regal as a great wrestler. He was also just a great character. He was so awesome. So that's just my little rant about William Regal. He was unbelievable. It was crazy. So then we had our first match. We had Sylvan, Grenier, and Rob Conway in the ring. They're waving the Quebec flag. They do their usual anti-America bullshit. It's ramped up to 11 now. They're in Washington D.C. And they sing "Oh Canada" horrendously. And then Tajiri starts off. He comes out and he starts off with the USA chant, and the fans chant along with him. So Tajiri starts off with some kicks, and Conway distracts the ref, which allows Grenier to cut him off. Grenier works him over for a bit, and Tajiri starts with a comeback with a handspring elbow and a few more kicks. Tajiri goes for the buzzsaw kick, but Grenier rolls him up for a near fall. Grenier charges Tajiri, but then he puts him into the tarantula, and then Conway gets on the apron to distract the ref, and then Rhino tries to go after him, but the ref holds Rhino back, and while the ref is holding Rhino back, Rob Conway swings by, and he bashes Tajiri right on the head, and then Rob Conway hits Tajiri with a face buster, and that ends it for Tajiri. This was just, a nothing match. It was fine. There was just nothing to it. So then we had some clips of house shows. They went to, like, Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania, and Frederick, Maryland, and stuff like that. Just the usual stuff. So after that, we had... I don't even know. I can't even describe this. This was such a fucking train wreck. But it was one of those train wrecks where you can't help but watch. It was so bad, it was good. We had a highlight reel. And the special guests were all 10 Diva Search finalists. So Jericho's in the ring, and he starts by quoting George Washington, saying, "I really, really love my job, Junior," which I really got to check my history book. I took Advanced Placement United States History, and you know what? I do not remember George Washington ever saying that. So then Jericho introduces the Diva Search finalists. They come out to this theme song, and what later became Christy Hemi's theme song. Fuck Bastion Booger, fuck Right to Censor, fuck Isaac Yankem. This is the worst theme song I've ever fucking heard. The worst song I've ever heard in my entire life. So let's bury that theme song deep beneath the earth, because I wanted to rip my ears off after I heard that. So all these girls come out. They're wearing, just next to nothing. And they're just, they have their hands in the air. They're bouncing up and down. And what's so awful about all this is, like, these girls just sucked the charisma out of the arena. Chris Jericho tried to hype the crowd up. The crowd was so fucking dead. Jericho's like, let's hear it for him. He was trying every trick in the book to try and make people care. So Jericho also had a lot of, like, passive aggressive pot shots. Like, he knew this was bullshit. Like, he knew all 10 of these girls had no idea what they were doing. And let me tell you, there were girls who later went on to be successful in the wrestling business. Within this batch of girls, you had, I mean, Christy Hemme did have a good career for herself. Maria Kanellis, she's in WWE, and she had a great run in Ring of Honor and all that stuff. But Maria really wasn't all that great right now, but she had to grow as a performer because, some people are going to take to this like a duck to water, you know what I mean? But performance, you really have to work on it, you know what I mean? Even if you are good, even if you have a natural talent for it, you still have to get out there and do it. They just threw these girls out there to look hot, and that's all they knew how to do, you know what I mean? It was awful. So Jericho basically says, please don't say anything that it will embarrass you, because you're already going to embarrass yourself enough by just bouncing around and looking like an idiot. Jericho basically says, just give us your name and where you're from. So we have Michelle McCool, just Michelle, obviously, from Florida. Christy Hemme says, hello! And then everyone just booed, which was hilarious. Then we had Julie. She says she's from Liberty, Kentucky. Now, here's the thing about Julie. Her little, nameplate, they had, a little, name graphic that appears. Like when the wrestlers show up and everything. They had a name graphic for every girl. And Julie's, it was Julie. It said Julia. God bless this girl. And God bless all these girls. I know I give them a hard time, but please, God bless them. But this girl messed up her name. Or WWE messed up her name, either or. Then we had Camille. Camille says she's from Dallas, Texas. And of course, that was the worst fucking thing you could say in Washington, D.C., home to the Washington Redskins. The Redskins obviously are a huge rival to the Dallas Cowboys, so of course everyone booed. Maria Kanellis said, hi, I'm from Illinois. Then everyone boos some more. There was Tracy. She got some applause. Carmella got a mixed reaction. Then we had Chandra, who is the twin of Julia/Julie, the girl who doesn't know her own name. And, the crowd didn't care about that either. Amy says where she's from, and everyone boos. And then Joy Giovanni is the last one, and she gets a mixed reaction. So Jericho comes out and he says, anything can happen in the WWE. So what I'm here to tell you is that in Eric Bischoff's office, there is an immunity envelope. And regardless of how your votes go next week, you will not go home if you have this immunity envelope. And Jericho says he basically takes them all back there. Well, before he does, he's like, all right, we're going to go back to Bischoff's office. I can't make any of this up. This is how long this segment was taking. Jericho hopped over the barricade, and of course Jericho hops over the barricade with relative ease, and he expects all the girls to follow him, and of course they are struggling like all hell to get over this barricade. In their defense, Jericho is wearing spandex tights, you know what I mean? And they're in high heels and these mini skirts and all that stuff. Jericho basically just makes fun of him. He's like, come on guys, you're athletic, you can get over a barricade, knowing damn well that none of these girls are really that athletic. So Jericho's leading them backstage, and then he says, and I quote, this is a direct quote, I'm leading the pack. I'm the Pied Piper. Except these aren't rats. I died. I almost died. For those of you who don't know what the Pied Piper is, it's like a German folktale. And the Pied Piper would catch rats, and if people didn't reward him for his duty, he would lure children away with his pipe playing as a means of revenge. But Jericho flat out saying he knew damn well what he was doing when he said, these girls aren't rats. He was being so ironic, and that was just, I had to pause and rewind that and turn the closed captions on just to make sure I knew I heard that correctly. So they're going backstage, and Jericho's hitting on every single one of them. And then eventually they get to Eric Bischoff's office, and he says, all right, go crazy. And then all these girls come in. They start tearing Eric Bischoff's office apart. The real casualty here was the food. Eric Bischoff had a shitload of food in his office, and they just threw that shit on the floor. It looked pretty good, too. I was getting hungry. I was like, damn, I really could use a sandwich. And that stuff looked really good, and you're just going to throw it away. So Jericho is just, he keeps stirring him up. He's like, look here, tear up this couch, tear up the food, tear up the portrait, all that stuff. It could be anywhere. So eventually Bischoff comes back, and when Bischoff comes back, Jericho pulls a fucking Houdini, and he just gets the hell out of there. I don't know where Jericho went, if he just slid past Eric Bischoff, because Eric Bischoff never saw Jericho because he said, who put you up to this? And if he had seen Jericho, he would have known it was him. But Jericho eventually just said abracadabra and just got the hell out of there. So all the girls are like, uh-oh, we're in trouble. Just the worst acting you've ever seen in your entire life. Amy said, Eugene put us up to this. And I was like, what a fucking bitch. What awful person. Eugene, why are you dragging his innocent ass into this? This guy just got beat the hell up by his favorite wrestler who he thought he was his friend. And you're going to try and blame him for your dumb... Oh my God. I was like, you know what? I'm going to send your ass home. So even 13 years removed from this stupid Diva search, and I want this thing to just never exist. Bischoff comes back, and he's all pissed, and then he reveals there is no envelope. And then Tracy rats out Jericho as soon as Bischoff asks who did it. Chris Jericho, obviously, is in a lot of trouble, and Bischoff decrees that he will face Kane tonight in a rematch from last week. So then we had Tyson Tomko versus the Hurricane. Hurricane came out with Stacy Keibler. It was a nothing match. They went back and forth for a bit. There was a distraction spot with Stacy bending over, and Tyson, of course, was distracted, so Hurricane could get a drop kick on him. Eventually, Tyson Tomko booted him, and Trish Stratus, distracted Hurricane, and then Tyson Tomko came in with another big boot, and he killed Hurricane, and then they were going to kill Stacy Keibler afterwards, but Rosa came in and made the save. So then we had another backstage segment with Flair and Batista. Flair's hyping Batista up, getting ready for his match with Benoit. And then Triple H comes in, and he's like, I got a plan, but come with me. And then they go into commercial break. Coming back from commercial break, we have Chris Benoit versus Batista in a non-title match. Benoit starts off strong with some chops, but Batista no-sells it and just starts dominating. He eventually goes for a power slam, but Benoit gets the 3 Germans. They go back and forth for a bit, but Batista cuts him off, and eventually Batista starts making these shots to the head. He just starts fighting a little dirty. The ref is doing excessive 4 counts, and eventually he ties up Benoit on the ropes, and he starts booting him in the head. And JR, being the great commentator that he is, informs the viewer, if you notice, Batista was constantly on the verge of getting disqualified, and he never went for a pinfall. Batista was not here to win the match. He was here just to injure Chris Benoit on the way to the Iron Man match next week on Raw. So this was great storytelling. It was actually a very, very good segment. As a match, it was just an average match. But, they did what they needed to do, and it was actually a very, very good story. Chris Benoit sold the injury well. Batista, after the match, hit Chris Benoit with what was probably the biggest powerbomb I've ever seen. Batista obviously got disqualified because he wasn't letting up on Benoit when he was tied up in the ropes. But this was a very, very good segment. It was a very, very good story to the match, and, of course, it makes Chris Benoit look all the more stronger heading into the match when he eventually beats Triple H. You know what I mean? They're giving him the underdog storyline. So we had a backstage segment with Lita and Matt Hardy. Lita's basically like, hey Matt, I know you don't want to talk to me, but let me just tell you, I love you, and I'm going to have this baby whether you want me to or not. That was a segment. I summed it up in 5 seconds. Then we had a backstage interview with Randy Orton. Grisham notes that Orton lost his title, and this is his first IC title defense loss in 7 months. And Randy Orton basically just gets pissed, and to compensate for his loss, he notes all the legends he's killed over the past year. Orton says that Edge's win was a fluke, and he will get his title back. Edge comes in, and he basically just berates Bob Orton Jr., and he says, you know what, I'd be self-conscious too if I were Randy Orton, because if my dad was Roddy Piper's bitch, I'd be ashamed too. And then Orton says he will make Edge his bitch tonight. So then we had Chris Jericho versus Kane. It was a rematch of last week where Kane was verbally roasted by Chris Jericho. That was the one thing I was upset about of not watching Raw last week. Jericho said, Kane, look at your qualifications. Bald, ugly, gap-toothed, lazy-eyed, and most importantly, like every diva in the back, you ain't got a set of balls, Junior, which I thought that would have won quote of the night, for those of you who are wondering. That definitely would have been quote of the night. That would have been quote of the year, would have been quote of the century. So we had Chris Jericho and Kane. Kane starts off strong, and Jericho just, does his little spurts of offense to fight back. Kane beats on Jericho for a bit, and then Kane goes for a boot, but Jericho chop blocks him and tries to set up the walls. Kane powers out, and they spill out of the ring. Jericho shoves Kane twice into the post and then hits an enziguri for the count-out win. Jericho is obviously just in the ring hoping that Kane, stays down for the count. Around 8, Kane did his zombie sit-up, but then he was struggling to get to his feet. So Jericho wins via count-out. Jericho's all happy, he's all smiles, he's celebrating. Then Eric Bischoff comes out and says, Jericho, you haven't won shit. Get back in the ring. This match is now Falls Count Anywhere. And this leads into the commercial break. Back from commercial, Jericho and Kane are in the ring. Jericho does the up yours taunt, and Kane spills out into the ring. Jericho high crosses him, and they brawl outside of the ring and into the crowd. Jericho and Kane brawl around, the separation between the floor seats and the risers, and they're around the hockey boards, and Jericho takes one of those sky cams, and he whams Kane right in the face with it. So it looks like Jericho's going to win, but Batista comes out of fucking nowhere, and he just slams Jericho right into the hockey boards, and then hits one of his big clotheslines, knocking Jericho out, and Kane gets the win. Now, during the commercial break, and I remember this from when I was live, they brought some refs out to, do the thing where they helped Jericho out of the arena. And I remember, because I was sitting at the 100 level, that's where I was. And it was actually a really, really good view. You had a good view of the ring, and you had a good view of the stage. I was right across from the stage. So it was, again, very good view. And this finish, like the whole camera shot and Batista coming in, and the whole finish of the match was right in front of me. It was right in front of my section. So I saw it right in front of my eyes, and it was so awesome. And I remember when they were bringing Jericho out of the arena, a lot of the guys, they sprawled to the end of the riser. And I was there, and we were all chanting Y2J, and I was convinced. I was so convinced that Jericho gave me a thumbs up. I was on cloud nine. Obviously, Jericho was selling an injury, so I don't know why he would have given a thumbs up. Granted, they were on commercial break, so he could have done anything he wanted. But still, I was so convinced. I was 100% convinced that Jericho made eye contact with me, 7-year-old me, and was like, "Yeah, bro," and gave me a thumbs up. I was so sure that happened, and I marked out like a bitch. I was cheering and screaming, and for the rest of the night, my night was made. Anything could have happened that night. We could have just had Big Dick Johnson versus the Boogeyman, and I would have been a happy man. So then we had clips of the Diva Search finalist special. This was bad stuff, and I was like, please just end this immediately. So Coach comes out and he introduces the Divas one more time, and they're in bikinis this time. So they're all out there, and they have a different theme song from Christy Hemi's theme song. Thank fucking God. And then we had our main event, Intercontinental Championship match, Edge and Randy Orton. Both start with some chain wrestling, and they do the double dropkick spot. Orton slings Edge throat first into the ropes and then hits a backbreaker, and this gives Orton the early advantage. Orton then back suplexes Edge onto the barricade heading into the commercial break. So back from commercial break, Orton has a chin lock on Edge, and then Edge tries to come back, but both hit each other with cross bodies. Both get up at 8 during the ref's 10 count, and then both just start throwing bombs and forearms at each other. Edge hits a boot to win the exchange. So at this point, they're going back and forth with the near falls. Edge hits a leg sweep for a near fall, and then Orton hits a drop kick for a near fall. Orton tries a crossbody, but Edge ducks, and then Edge goes for an Oklahoma roll for a near fall. Edge drops Orton on the ropes and then spears Orton off the apron. That was a pretty good spot. He speared him from behind, which was pretty cool. Edge gets Orton back into the ring and then hits a missile dropkick for a really, really great near fall. The crowd was eating up every single near fall in this match. This kind of reminded me of your typical WWE main event where it's just near fall after near fall after near fall, and the crowd was really, really into this. And I remember as a kid, I was like, I so wanted Edge to win this match. And I remember it was myself, my older brother, and my dad. We were all in the crowd. And my dad, he watched wrestling a little bit, during the Golden Age and stuff like that. He remembered Hulk Hogan and everything else. And I remember him just saying oh my God, I want Edge to win and everything. We were all pro Edge and we all wanted Edge. And the crowd in DC, of course, because he's the babyface. I mean, what else do you expect? They were all pro Edge. Edge tries a crossbody, but wipes out the ref instead because Orton ducked out of the way. Orton hits a thumb to the eye, and then he goes outside of the ring and grabs the chair. He goes to use the chair, he swings it above his head, but Orton gets speared by Edge for his troubles. Edge goes for the pin, but there's no ref. Orton hits Edge with a low blow and then hits the RKO. A ref finally comes to his senses. He starts crawling over and does the 1, 2, and at literally the last possible second, Edge kicks out. The place is going crazy. Edge back elbows Randy Orton, and Edge sets him up for a spear. He hits it. The crowd thinks it's over. 1, 2, Orton kicks out literally at the last possible second. And then finally, Edge rolls up Orton with a backslide and gets his feet on the ropes for the win. This was a great main event. The crowd was so hot for this thing. They were so happy when Edge won. Granted, you could argue that the roll-up was a cheap finish, and I would think it would be cool if we could see a spear, 1, 2, 3, but I was fine with the roll-up. It was a really, really fantastic match. And then after the match, JR and King plug the Iron Man match next week on Raw, and they sign out. But what I remember, I guess this happened after the cameras turned off. Obviously, it probably would. Edge was celebrating with the crowd, and I remember he took off JR's hat and put it on his head, and he rode around like he was riding a horse or something with the Intercontinental Championship. So that's all I really remember from Edge's celebration. But yeah, that was a very important Raw to me just because it was the second Raw I ever saw live. A very, very fun show, and again, a show that I remembered even when I was 7 years old. So that's it for me. My name is Jericholic8704, and I will see all of you guys later.